What's going on, everybody? Core Conversations for Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. I feel like it's branded day. So dad goals, so am I. I'll explain this to you if you don't know what it is. I have my amazing co-host who will be joining me shortly. And it's a freestyle Wednesday. I have some guests who will be popping in, and we're going to have a good time with it. So let me just bring Misty in right now. And then, before I bring Misty in, Misty, I'll bring you in a second. I got to share a quick picture, so I can't have you on the screen and share it. So just give me a minute, and we'll do that. So let's go to our little housekeeping stuff. So, Core Conversations podcast. So our femme entity. So first thing I want to talk about here is our Core Conversations podcast. So Femme Entity is an organization that's in Halifax that works with empowering women, and we had Irene come on and just did an amazing talk. And I want you all to hear that. So you hear the stuff that Misty talks about in her workshops and how others tie in empowering yourself, self-care, having a product and a service and a subscription-based model, and all that stuff is really wrapped up and tied up really nicely in this podcast. So listen to it as a business owner, listen to it as a movement professional, listen to it as someone who is an entrepreneur in this space. And I thought it was really life-giving. I thought it was nourishing. So I hope that you enjoy that as well. My little shout-outs. Few things to just give a shout out to. One of them is Claire Dunphy is doing her 10-week mentorship for Pilates teachers. So that's coming up, and she was on here and shared. And she has a whole series of mentors like Cecile here who are going to be part of her support team for you as an instructor. So if you want to dive deeper into the work, she's a fantastic teacher, a really passionate teacher, and I'm sure you'll grab a lot from that. The second thing I want to rattle off here is I love the fact that Carol Pilates Thinker is back onto her blog, and she's sharing some things. So if you want to get back to reading, her blogs are back up again, and she's sharing some interesting perspectives on it. So just sending a shout out to her. If you're following her, you can just check that out as well. One more thing. Okay. All right. I'm going to share a story that I mentioned before. Oh, sorry, the other one too. Even before I get into that. This is the other one too. So my amazing wife was my guest on Monday, Misty. So it was almost like part two from our conversation that we had on your live. And once again, we were circling back into marriage, second marriage, happiness, friendship, Valentine's Day, and we touched on a bunch of different topics. So it was one of those moments of just, I guess, fun and vulnerability for me in sharing it. So that was fun. All right. So all that stuff's out of the way. The one last thing I want to touch on is this talk about Cedar Park Farms. Can we see this here? Oh, it's a little short. Yeah, it's fun. Okay, I don't think it's gonna show. Okay. All right. So I put a post up yesterday about somewhere here in Mississauga called Cedar Park Farms. And Cedar Park Farms was the most economically successful farm in the, okay, I'll repost it. So the Cedar Park Farms is one of the most economically successful farms at the turn of the century, the 19th century here in Mississauga. And Black History Month, we're talking about these things, and I was really digging deep to find things about my area on Black History, and found out the story about this gentleman by the name of George W. Ross. And he was the owner of this farm, and he was like the who's who of the time, and had this land, and was commerce and all that stuff. And the interesting thing about it, as I put in my post, is how we didn't know very much about him from a heritage standpoint. So people thought he was black, and on the censuses that they had at the time, you had the choice of black, and they used a phrase here, which someone brought to my attention, I didn't know was a derogatory term, mulatto. And it's an antiquated term. We don't use it anymore. It has a negative connotation, but that was the word that they used on the census, and that's the word that I used in my talk. So that phrase, so that was almost like you're black and white, or you could write where you came from, Scottish, you're from Scotland, Ireland, whatever. So on the first census, he put that. And on the next census, the next time it came around, he put Scottish. And then the next one, whatever. So as the years went on, he realized that it was easier to feign whiteness in order to be successful than to designate himself as black on these censuses. So there's not very much known about him, which also impacts the way that we talk about history and black history in Canada, black history in Mississauga. Because black history in Mississauga was a checkpoint. People who were, the enslaved who were coming up as refugees and finding places to live, they went out to St. Catharines. There's a statue of Harriet Tubman in St. Catharines, which is an hour and a half away from me. I'm gonna take a picture of it one day. So this Underground Railroad came, and people were en route, and they didn't stop in Mississauga. They kind of took a break here and they kept going somewhere else. But the few people who stayed in this area, if they had some other heritage besides black, it was advantageous for them to tick that box, because when it came down to choosing who's going to get land, they may say, okay, well, we could just take away their land first, or we're going to give choice land to those people. We'll make sure that the Scottish people are taken care of. So if your name was ticked on the box and people didn't really ask you questions, and your skin is fair enough that you can get away with it, people were getting away with that. So there's no history of some of the black people that lived in this area. Some of the most successful people are actually of a black heritage. And this article went on to say that that family owned that farm for generations, and the Ross family that lives in this area, some of them didn't even know that they had a black heritage. So it's really fascinating, the black history of this area. When you start to dig deep on your area, what that looks like, it is a completely different story than what you see on the global scale. And there's really fascinating nuances, like the old Sam's Lane and how city council and how the government took care of this black person. That's another story that I have on my feed, where it's like, it's not a sad story or like a life hack story or whatever it is. It's actually a great story of a black man who ran from slavery, came up here, lost his legs due to the exposure to the cold, and how the city took care of him, gave him a place to live in his last days. And Old Sam's Lane is actually Wesley Street, right out down on the lakeshore of Mississauga. So like, there's some good stories out there too. So I just encourage you to dive deep and listen and learn the history of your area, because you're not gonna learn this stuff in school. And they're great stories to tell people, and everyone's always, appreciative to learn something new. So I wanted to throw that out. I also want to acknowledge me using that term, and wanted to clarify that I was quoting from a census, and that's how they classified at that time as an antiquated, derogatory term that we don't use anymore, but I used it to say that was in the census. So I apologize if that was an offense to anybody, and I want to illuminate the whole story on Cedar Park Farms, George W. Ross, Samuel Carter, all of these different faces of people that lived in this area that left a legacy. So that's the Black History Month piece for today. I want to tie that in. I'm going to bring Misty on right now. Got some other things to talk about, but we're going to bring her up. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Of course, Mr. Phils was the one who brought that to my attention, that phrase was like, oh, I've kind of said it wrong. Like,
I should have known.
Yes, yes. And the funny thing is, like, I think it's just the way I present it. I almost present it like I was just calling people that. It's like, no, no, no. That was actually that's how it was quoted, right? So just wanted
Sure.
to, yeah. Anyway,
Listen, language changes constantly. Like it's hard to keep up with it. And then you've got those that are trying to reclaim language and there's just so many nuances to try to work our way through, right? It's always a minefield. So,
it is
we
absolutely.
have to be respectful of our audience and do our best.
Yes, and I like reclaiming words. I like redeeming words. I love the phrase, like this concept of redeeming words that we throw into such a negative connotation where, it wasn't like the word, I don't know. Yeah. I gotta be careful talking about redeeming words because I don't want to like offend someone by the way
Sure.
what I'm saying? But anyway,
Yeah, I
interesting.
know exactly what you're saying. And it's funny. I was just having this talk with Glenn, Glenn's my partner for those of you that don't know. Um, but I believe that there are some words that cannot be redeemed. I think, and I described it like the movie Poltergeist. You can try to build a house on the burial ground, but it's not going to go well for you
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because the spirits know what they want. I feel like there are some words that are just so mired in darkness that it's
Yes.
best to leave them in the dark.
Absolutely. Yes. I agree. There's some words that are kind of on, like I feel aren't that far gone that I try and bring up here on these shows a lot, like competition, like being the best. Like, you know what I mean? That stuff like that where you cringe because then you go back to being the last one picked on your team when you're in elementary school. But I'm like, no, no, no. When you're talking about yourself versus yourself, when you're thinking about self-improvement and self-care, there's elements of it that can be redeemed, right? So I mean, like, there's different words and different thoughts that come with things. So I think it comes down to being intentional with our words and being kind with our motives with
Right,
any,
right.
right? So
I don't think the intention of the word competition was, to give people flashbacks to the sixth grade dodgeball festival. It was obviously the word competition has many nuanced meanings, but it has its general meaning as well, and that's
mhm.
important. I think when we're talking about other words that need to be redeeming, I think it's more of a social, personal type of affair or appeal that we need to be
Yes.
discussing. And
Yeah,
there's the difference for me.
absolutely. Misty,
Yes.
I'm gonna vent for a minute.
Ooh, I'm ready for it.
Okay, and I'm going to think out loud in public, and you can reel me back in if this doesn't make sense.
Okay.
All right. So I was watching a kung fu movie called Ip Man.
If man?
Ip, IP,
Oh,
Man.
I'm writing
Okay.
that down.
Okay. Ip Man. And if any of you are kung fu people, like there's like 4 episodes, 4 movies and stuff like that. In this kung fu movie, this gentleman moves to an area, and then the master in the area says, "You can't teach your kung fu in this area because I am the master of kung fu in this area. I'm the king, I'm the master, everyone else teaches, and then they pay me, and I'm the head master, so you can't." So Ip Man is like, I just want to just run my business, do my thing, take care of my family. I won't cause you any trouble. And he's like, no, we have to fight. He says, I'm not going to fight you. But then finally, they decide they'll put their tea down. They won't tell anyone who wins the fight, but they'll have their spar. And if you lose, you can't teach. If you win, you can teach. At the same time, a little boy loses his kite in the tree. So he climbs up in the tree. And while he's in the tree, he could look down into the courtyard and see these two gentlemen fighting. And Ip Man beats the master, embarrasses him, and he says, you know, you cannot tell anyone that I lost. I'll lose the honor of my dojo, of my school, so we can't tell anyone that I lost. He says, fine, I won't. And then the story goes on where this young boy goes back into the courtyard, says, Ip Man beat Master so and so, and then the whole hoopla starts, and then the master is embarrassed, confronts Ip Man, and then the story goes on from there. He was embarrassed because he was the king and he lost his title. He lost his thing. I had a situation the other day where a person requested that their IG live get taken down because they mentioned some people in their chat, and the content of what they mentioned would be embarrassing to them. So they reached out to the first individual and asked him to ask me to take it down because it's embarrassing for them. It looks bad on them. It looks bad on their studio that this situation happened. I respected that, took it down. You know, it's not for public consumption. It's not accessible. It's down. It's gone. And I feel like I'm in the middle of a kung fu movie where one person is saying, "You've dishonored my dojo, so this has to stop." And there's this sense of like, I am the king, don't dishonor me, instead of saying, I made a mistake, this is what happened in my world, own it, redeem it, reclaim it, move on from it. Instead, it's like, I am honored, I'm embarrassed, I'm dishonored, stop. So respected it, I did it, but at a high level, those concepts kind of bother me.
Okay. So here's my take on all of it, any of it. I believe that if it is a fact and it is something that happened in real life that there are witnesses to and that is a part of somebody's history, then they have the right to talk about it as long as they're not doing it in a disparaging fashion, period. And what's more, I think, and this is just me again, we're so caught up in the airs and the image and not really the depth of the story, right? Was there a reason for mentioning that? There had to have been a story behind that story that names were mentioned. And, you know, there are people that'll say you never say names or whatever. But, you know, again, we're having personal conversations here. Sometimes things come out of your mouth. Again, if it wasn't done in a disparaging way, we're not protecting our feudal manners, though in Pilates we very often are in a feudal mentality, I think. I think the ask is big. I think your reaction, I mean, love, you mean it, but you could have done something else, maybe edited out the names if you had to. I am aware of the conversation you're talking about, and I think that it was a good conversation. And I think it was an important point. So maybe you should revisit that. Maybe you should blurt the names out. Put a big X over its mouth as he's saying it.
Right.
But that's just
yeah, he mentioned a few names.
Yeah.
I can put it back out as a podcast and clip that piece out, because there was a lot of rich content in there, a lot of rich technical content in there too. For example, he was talking about standing in Pilates and why we always go to a horizontal. And it just challenged me to think about, well, how much of the standing repertoire do I have in my toolbox, in my memory? You know what I mean? So like it provoked me in so many ways that the mention of these names was almost irrelevant to the broader conversation, but was contextually appropriate. And he probably shouldn't have mentioned the name, but I don't think it was defaming the person.
No, I agree. I don't think so either. In fact, the person was wronged in a way. I don't think, again, we have to be real people. At the end of the day, we have to be real people. And this industry does have a problem with king making and queen making. And it's something that we do to ourselves. And just like the rest of history that we're trying not to talk about, if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't acknowledge it, this is a problem that we have as an industry and we need to be doing better. We're going to keep doing it. This is why And you guys even said in your conversation, Pilates is kind of stunted. It's behind the rest of fitness in a lot of ways. This is absolutely reinforcing that by not saying the things that happened and needed to be said. We dance around eccentricities of the elders and even of Joe himself. We can't say that because he might be looked at in a negative light. Well, stop looking at him like Jesus and admit the fact that he's a real person and they're all real people, and that eliminates all of that. That's just my take on it.
That echoes everything we've been talking about all week. Like, I mean, as much as I wanted to do a Valentine's Day post on Monday, we talked about divorce on Monday. And then Robin came out and we talked about divorce on Tuesday. We are imperfect people, and we can't walk into the studio and pretend that our lives are absolutely perfect, and they've always absolutely been perfect. And I'm going to teach you this perfect exercise practice, and it better be perfect like me, and then you could run along with your day.
Oh, but you're never going to be perfect like me. You are never going to equal who I am, because I've been doing this longer. I have been fill in the blank. I am perfect. You will try, but you will never ascend to my level. There's too much of that in this business.
Too much of that.
Yeah.
That's probably why that bothered me more than a breach of confidentiality of a name, is that it's a perpetuation of this facade that we arrived here immaculately.
Right. I love the way you said that. And we should all know better. But getting back to what you said about, I forgot what you said, but getting back to that place where you're thrown in that distress of, I remember what it felt like when I went through X. I'm having that recall, that memory. We're just re-injuring people. Isn't there a better way? Haven't we evolved? I like to say that some of us are evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And, in this space and what you're talking about and doing with core conversations, you are inviting the evolution to happen.
Yes.
By using stories and inviting people to tell their stories. So if somebody doesn't want to tell a story, this is a story conversation format.
And not only that, stories don't happen in a vacuum. There are going to be other people in your story.
Yeah.
And the problem arises when the other person in the story is not ready to share their story.
Right.
And their story's out there.
Just like divorce.
Right.
Getting back to what you said about divorce. But it's true, a couple gets divorced. You only know one part of the story. One person wants to share their end. The other person doesn't want to share. They don't want to talk about it. So there's only this one version of the story out there in the ether. And who does that help? Nobody. So.
My book came out. I contributed to a book on leadership, and a lot of it was centered around my life at that time. So while my ex-wife was living her life in silence after a divorce, I wrote a book. And that was probably a poor decision at that time in terms of the way that I put that out there, right? Because like you said, she wasn't ready to share her story, and there you go, my story of how I'm raising my boys and how I'm living life and what I'm doing my work and how I'm seeing things from this perspective at that time, which is different than my perspective now. And she has her perspective, which is different, that she wasn't ready to share, but there it is. It's out there in a book.
At the same time, though, don't you have the right to heal in the manner in which you see fit?
Yeah, and she saw that as well. That's where we landed with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heal publicly. I heal in these arenas where I can share and be vulnerable and collaborate with people on what that looks like and just pull strength from people, right? So
there are some people that need to turtle to heal.
Yeah.
And there are times as out there as I am, I just need to just retreat and mull it over and figure it out, and who knows how long that takes, but that's just my process. There are other times where I have to draw energy and wisdom and even support from the world that I live in.
Yes.
And so, I think everyone has the right to their process. It's one thing, if you're out there smearing somebody, it's another thing speaking from your point of view.
Right.
Different story altogether.
Different story. Absolutely. Okay, 3 days of talking about divorce. Awesome. Great.
Over. We have other things to talk about. No more divorce. I just talked about divorce last night. So it's just really funny that it's like divorce week.
It's divorce week, also known as Valentine's week. Awesome.
Tomato, tomato.
Right. Crazy. Too funny. Well, thank you for sharing that. Allow me to just speak out loud on that. If anyone has any comments on that, you can please put it in the chat. And I don't know if I want to talk anymore about it, but please share. Yeah.
It may be a part of your process. I thought the whole debacle was a little interesting, so it's cool.
It was interesting. Like, and sometimes I just need to just
digest.
So Tasha Edwards is joining us, and that's Hip Healthy Check, as you can see in the chat. And last week we had Risa Shepherd join us, and with all of our little hiccups with technical difficulties and stuff, she got on late, and we didn't get to Tasha. So this conversation, sorry.
I don't think it was an ad hominem, not at all. It was very clear, blunt, and specific. It was just that somebody didn't want to share it. Somebody didn't want it shared.
Yeah.
We're concerned about how it made them look, which to me actually it makes them look pretty sympathetic. But That's just me.
And actually stronger, right? Like, I mean, you're here still,
right?
Yeah. So. Anyway, so let's bring Tasha on.
Tasha.
let's change gears here. Hello.
Good morning.
Hi,
good
Tasha.
morning, loves. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Yes, like I was going to say.
I'm coming to you. First of all, it's good to be seen, and it's good to see you all. I am coming to you from my real life. The duality of my existence, which is my grandson's car seat.
Okay.
And my very expensive pants that had to be washed at the laundromat because my washer broke. And so it's interesting because I feel like these are my two lives. Like, I don't think I'm too good to go to the laundromat. You know what I'm saying? I'm in there like talking to the people and hanging my clothes up, but it's like a former part of my life. So it's actually pretty interesting to be at the at the laundromat with my people in these very expensive workout clothes. But you know,
the contrasts that we live.
Are we talking about divorce today?
No.
Oh, I was like, I was like, okay, I can add to that. Good morning, Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah. I mean, okay.
If you want to throw it out there, we may as well. If you have something to contribute.
I mean,
I'm a relationships guy. I could talk this all day, as much as I loathe it sometimes. But yes.
So there are two. I came in on two parts of the story, and number one, I got divorced very early, in my 20s, and it was hard because we were immature. It was hard because we had a young child, and it was hard because we were petty. You know, you just say that. And one of the things, Missy, that you were saying about as far as like sharing, you have the right to share your side of the story. And I thought two different things from that because I didn't hear the divorce part till after. And so my divorce, I'm like you, Martin, I self-published a poetry book and it is straight hate. And I said what I had to say, but I said it how I wanted to say it because that was my right to say what I wanted to say. But
yes.
When you said stories, what I was thinking about what happened to my son, and I said, I have the right to share my side of the story, but there were some things that weren't mine to tell.
Yes.
And so I was thinking, I had two sides of that. But divorce side, yeah, I think it's different when you're older and you know how to handle things better because then, and thank God there was no social media. I think
Right.
you have to learn with grace, and because social media and outlets like selling books is probably not the best place because they circle around. My son was 4, and so now like he's 24, and I don't, thank God he's never seen it. But to have to explain my behavior that's in print,
Immortalized. Yeah.
yeah, I wish I had acted differently, and I could have shared without feeling like I needed to take him down. But that was petty. It was fun then, but 20 years later, just yeah, it was fun then.
We evolve a little
Yeah,
bit
it
A
over
was
little
fun
bit.
then. It was fun then, but yeah, I wish I had kept my mouth closed, honestly, that way. So that's all I want to say about divorce. What else are we talking about today?
I wanted to celebrate accessibility in the Pilates space. Can we move there?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Um,
good.
absolutely. Because that's actually my work. And I have very much gotten away from using anything like DEI, because I feel like now, because it's been used so much, it's almost like you're desensitized to it, you know?
what
Right.
So when people say DEI, it's like, here they go again,
Hmm.
right? And so it's because the term has been out there so much, and it hasn't necessarily always been used by us for the betterment of us, because there are people who throw it out just because they know it's going to get likes and attention. I think just like when they were talking about Breonna Taylor, and when I posted about the verdict, I didn't put her picture. I put myself and my daughter's picture, because
Yes, I
you can
remember that.
you can scroll and be so desensitized because you think it's another thing you don't want to hear, until you see it in a different way, and then it makes sense. So I have tried to stay away from a lot of the uh,
buzzword.
buzzwords, yeah, because people are desensitized. And so access is different, to me, because we're talking about access for so many different reasons. It opens the conversation not just on race, but we have a weight bias issue in Pilates. And also, because of the way it's set up, there's also a social economic space, that something that is so beautiful and so healing, because of the way it's been created. I mean, it's a lot of money and people have to make a living, like, no doubt. But it's like the people who have the money keep getting healthier, and the people who don't never get it, even though we're everywhere talking about how wonderful it is. And so when I think accessibility, not just that's just not the responsibility of the industry, it's the responsibility, I feel like, of me in the industry, because I was that person on the other side,
So
you know
how do you differentiate between the industry and you in the industry?
because I think the industry has a problem because of the way we market.
Hmm.
Like, I don't own any spaces, so when I say the industry, how we have created, um, there's an air, so to speak, about Pilates. And then when you start putting in equipment and stuff like that, like, that's an I don't think that anything will ever be less expensive than a reformer. Like, a reformer is a reformer, right? I mean, that's just point blank. But I feel like I may not be able to change the price of a reformer, but I certainly have the skills to be able to go out in the community and teach. So that's what I mean. Like, as an individual, I can make um, changes for things that I can do that don't include fighting the higher ups, which I also do as well. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, though, and I'm agreeing with you. I agree with the whole piece about access. I always approach things from the DEIA perspective, and I don't usually use all of the letters because, people are tired of alphabet soup, to be honest. I agree with that.
Mhm.
But I also, part of me believes that we still have to call a spade, and there is a diversity problem, an equity problem, and an inclusion problem in this business. Then when we get to the piece of access, I always circle back to, what are we trying to do? And if the goal is, hey, I only want to work with wealthy people that all look just like me and all have the same hair, okay, that's great. But if I'm really looking to get the work into the hands of all of the people, that's when I have to talk about the accessibility piece. Because at the end of the day, the work is barely accessible in so many communities, to so many communities, that something has to be addressed if we're really going to try to allow the work to be what it was supposed to be, which is really, truly a lifestyle changing program.
A nation-saving program.
I'm sorry?
And like a nation-saving program. Like Pilates put it out, like this is something that can save our country from obesity and from this. And like he called himself the director of physical culture. Like he was trying to shift a paradigm, not just get people exercising.
Right. I'm sorry. I thought you said a reservation saving. I'm hungry, but
well,
I didn't make it today.
Let me throw this out there real quick. And so I am in no way overlooking the diversity piece. I think I specifically am at so many intersections that it all rings my bell. Like when I think diversity, like it's fine, but if I'm like in a position where I've learned the work, so now I'm one of the teachers, but I can't even afford a reformer myself to practice, then that's the intersection, because I was one of those people, you know. And it's like there are just so many ping pongs. There is levels to this, you know. If we can just like throw Kendrick Lamar out there, is levels to this. And so I think that they are all flashing lights. But also, like if we think about just if Pilates came to the US in like the 1920s, right? This was just like a couple years after women even had the right to vote, let alone Black people in the 60s. We're talking about 40 some years later. And so why, when we're talking about health now, you know, like 100 years later, there's a different part of the conversation because we have different sets of issues. Like Pilates is awesome and it can be life-changing if it gets to your life, you know, but we also have to talk about like Pilates is not the only part of the magic.
Correct.
You know, and so I think as far as opening it up, because if Pilates actually ends up in the neighborhoods and spaces of people who aren't worried about whether they have a farmer's market in their neighborhood. Does that make sense? And so it changes the conversation again. There are two sides of the coin. There aren't any Pilates studios over here by the laundromat. I just wanted to throw that out there. But but again, because I have a heart for that, because that's what I came out of, then I see I see like all the things. So I'm like, Pilates is awesome, but we probably need to get something other than nasty red apples in the local store, you know. So it's life-changing, and it was life-changing to the people who had access to it.
Yeah,
sure.
You know, and could afford it. And so my thought is always about how to translate what I consider translate the work to get it into people who have never even heard of the word Pilates. Like, how do I translate the work for my mom who's on a fixed income on the south side of Chicago and doesn't drive? You know, and so those are, again, everybody has their sticking points for what affects them individually. Like first rate, like Missy, and I know you have the studio out there where there was nobody who looks like you. And we have talked about that. And so I just think that all of us, from all the different angles, in all the different spaces, with all the different spots of, I don't want to say the word trigger, it's really like trauma. You know, we want to make things different for what we do and where we are. And we're all doing that from different levels. That's why I think we need all hands on deck, because everybody can't solve and run after everything, you know? And so I appreciate the mosaic of people who are out here in these streets fighting for the diversity, the access, the inclusion, because we're all hitting the thing from different angles.
Different angles.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Right.
and so I'm loving it. We need all the people.
Absolutely. That's the celebration piece. And it's funny, I was just thinking about something, Misty, as you were saying, and before you came on, Tasha, we were talking about redeeming words. And we say like DEI work, and then you said diversity, equity and inclusion. When I was working at Lifetime, I'm dropping names, dropping places, and I was an assistant manager there. And then when I went through a bunch of different roles, and I came back to a management role, and we were in this place where we were giving people a pip. Every time they did something wrong, we give them a pip. I'm going to pip this person. Performance improvement plan. So we would say, I'm just going to pip that person because they're going to be fired at some point because they're not selling enough. So we're going to pip them. And when I got back into the role, the very first thing I said to them was like, I want everyone to stop calling it a pip and start calling it a performance improvement plan. The key word is improvement. If you call it a pip, it's now a swear word. People know that they're being pipped before they get fired. When you call it a performance improvement plan, we break down the acronym, we call it what it is, and we focus on the improvement, then people know that we're trying to help them to succeed in this job instead of giving us a paper trail to fire them.
Right.
So when it comes back to our DEI work, DEIA work, whatever we want to throw, whatever acronym on the end of it, when we keep it as an acronym, then someone has a trigger word and they have a catchphrase and a buzzword that they can use to look like they're doing the work.
Exactly.
But when we break it back down and unpack each word, then we can actually make some progress and we can redeem the words and redeem the intent of the words instead of throwing around an acronym to look like I'm worthy of a pat on my back.
I also believe in dovetailing off of that. I think that there are plenty of people out there that really want to do the work, but I think there are a lot of people who genuinely are looking for an out. And so if you use these quick quips, these pips, these words that are throwaway words, kind of smack you and move along type of words, you're giving somebody that easy exit. You're saying, I am going to negate my argument because I know that this particular term is one that they are going to recoil from.
Yes.
So you don't have to assign that term. You can, Tasha gets around it by saying access, because at the end of the day, it's the same thing. When we're talking about access, and I want to put this out there, and I'm going to keep doing this all the time. We very often talk about these things from a color lens, and it's not color. Like Tasha said, there is definitely size bias in this business. There's ableism in this business. There's all kinds of pinpointed issues that we allow to be enveloped in these big umbrellas so that we can just walk away from them and say that they don't matter because that doesn't affect me. I work in a studio where everybody looks different and we're all super nice to each other. And so therefore there's no problems here. Well, that's great from your view, but talk to the person over there that you may, if you sit down and think about it, when they come to the staff meeting, they always sit back in the corner by themselves. They rarely give you any input. They're always looking a little bit nervous and gun-shy and confused whenever you call them on something, even if it's just to say hello. That's a culture problem. There's a reason why they're not mending or blending into the fold.
Yes.
Accessibility is not just about color. Oh, and P.S.,
Exactly.
if we want to make it about money, Black people aren't the only poor people in the world. Black communities aren't the only communities that can't afford Pilates. But if we are really speaking to this work from that place of believing everybody needs it, shouldn't we be reaching to the people that really need it? We can talk to our essential workers, the people that are essential because we can't get our damn Wendy's in time and we're screaming and yelling about it. We don't really care about what all of this maelstrom that we're living in has done to them. Why aren't we reaching out to those people? There's really a lot of ways and avenues and intersections to approach when we're talking about this. But people choose to get stuck in the whole, oh, well, you know, I don't really want to work with those people. Or we're diverse enough.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And two things. The other thing is that, of course, we have a hierarchy problem in Pilates as well. You know,
Yes.
like they aren't ready to do, because I'm a first and a half generation teacher, and this is no knock to you if that is very important to you. Please hold on to that. But what I'm saying is, it's like we're fighting with everybody. We don't want you to have access. And Misty's qualified, but she didn't train under this person. So we don't want her either. And it has nothing to do with her color. It has to do with her generation and her lineage. You know, and it's like when we get in there, I'm like, all of Pilates needs to go on vacation. Like, just like, kind of like, come down a little bit, because it's like there are these constant pockets that we keep finding to separate people, even though we're out on social media saying we're doing the work. A piece of clip art still doesn't change the fact that you believe that only a certain people should do this elder's work. So I'm gonna throw that out there, y'all sticky note that one, because that's something else that we have to think about when we're talking about DEI. If it wasn't that people needed to have other people see them be a part, then name dropping, Cornell would not be charging $3,500 for a DEI certification.
Yep.
You know, and here's the thing. DEI is more than learning the points. I have a master's degree in organizational counseling. I can give you a PowerPoint on XYZ. Good. You took the information in, great. I passed the test. I went to the training. Here's my certificate, great. And then you wake up the next day and everything you have done is still the same. You know, it's like Misty said, you have to start asking the questions, like, of yourself, not you know, I mean, if you have a Pilates studio in Idaho, chances are you're not going to have a lot of Black people in your studio. It doesn't mean that you just focus on color, because we have to now talk about the culture of the spaces that we create, which is why even if people have the money and they're white and they live in the suburbs, it's the culture that we're creating in the stuff that we say is so good for everyone that's keeping people out. And that's the inclusion part, because people, I mean, if we're just honest, people like the exclusion part. They want to belong to the special hierarchy. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And I think those are the things that need to be spoke on, because it's like, as long as I got one Black instructor, then, like Misty was saying, I check my box and I'm good. Yeah, but your culture sucks.
Your culture sucks.
And so this is what I'm saying, like, on an individual things, how we can do on an individual level. And there has to be someone who is willing to open their mouth. And when I say challenge, I'm not talking shame. I'm not talking guilt. I'm saying challenge, you know? And I work at a place, I'll just share, that I noticed, I was looking at the flyers, and they were all thin, white, young women in sports bras, even though at one time, a lot of the gyms, you couldn't even wear a sports bra in the gym. It was just part of the dress code. And the issue was, when I said it was like they felt ashamed because it never crossed their mind. And what I said is, you have to understand that there's a privilege to never having to think about it, because if you only see you and your friends, it never has to cross your mind.
Yes.
And if nobody ever challenges that, or like brings that to light for you, then you can live over here, because it's not your issue. And so we need the people who are willing to say, right there, you know, this kind of goes against what we're saying we want to do, because you can totally close the door when it's not your neighborhood.
Right.
So yeah, I am so glad that you all and everybody who's out there speaking in the way that they do. As long as we're going for the bigger picture, do you? but get it done, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Again, it's not as cut and dry as people like to make it out to be.
Right.
And, you know, if it shouldn't take you far to look around in your space and see where there are gaping holes when it comes down to, you know, othering and belonging. Are we creating spaces of other, or are we creating spaces of belonging? And, you know, listen, I started Pilates in 2000. The elitism was the purpose. That was the point. That was the assignment. And I mean, if somebody on this chat says back in the early aughts, it was not about being elite, I would love to hear your perspective on that. But I specifically remember that being the case. And when there was a person who walked into a space that shouldn't have been there, it was very, very clearly defined. And it didn't matter where I was taking Pilates, where I was in the country or even in my own town. And it's still that way in a lot of spaces today. And when you're searching websites, Pilates websites, you see a lot of this over and over again today. And so, you know, I'm going to say it again because people get angry when I say this, but I'm standing by it. Take color out of it. The problem still exists. So the problem isn't the color. The problem is the culture. And as Tasha said, Pilates culture can suck sometimes. So what are we doing about it to make it better? That's the point. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this discussion. And Tasha, I have to tell you, I really, really appreciate what you're doing, because when we started talking about this last year, you were like, this is what I'm going to do. And, you know, that's really important. You touched on something earlier too. You said you still have to get paid. You still have to make money doing this, because the other part of the problem with our industry and this elite business is the high levels or the high numbers of hobbyists that are doing this. They're not doing this to earn a living. It's not their profession, so to speak. And I'm talking about teaching, studio ownership, etc. When you're a hobbyist, your needs are way different. And therefore, your lens is going to be very different from the person that's doing this as a living. I think that's an important piece too.
Yeah. Matt, can I jump on this question real quick?
Sure, yeah. This is my brother. He's asking, just jump in here. So he's not a Pilates person asking the question. So it's good he's asking it.
Well, I'm going to give you this from the perspective of actually being that person. And so would it be so I worked at a bar studio, a local bar studio, and I was the lead instructor and the only Black. I was the lead instructor because I was good. I was the lead instructor because I had the experience, but it didn't change how I felt sitting at a staff meeting, looking around, feeling like I haven't seen a Black person in the studio in weeks. You know, it's a dual existence. So I was proud because my work was honored, because I was in that position, because I deserved it. But it didn't have anything to do, and it wasn't that they made me feel some type of way. It's not that. But we could go weeks and there's not another person in there, you know, and there's just a feeling. Is it a good thing? I mean, I guess, but we also have situations where people would make you the featured instructor because they don't know what else to do to diversify. So they're saying if they give you the lead position, then you should feel good and stop talking, you know?
Right.
And that happens in some spaces too, because that's what people, they're like, oh, well, she made me this, so she must believe in it, and I'll drop the conversation. That's what they want. And so it depends on the situation, but it doesn't affect the feeling of belonging.
That's the culture piece.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And we just have a lot of work to do as someone who teaches. There are two sides of this, because I teach bar, yoga, and Pilates, right? And so there are times that I have invited my Black friends and they'll say, I'm not doing that white people stuff, you know? And it's just like, it's almost like you get stuck in a position that you can't win for losing.
You are losing either way, so you might as well have a good time as your ship burns.
Yeah. And so it was like, one of the things that I have always said for 17 years, that the reason I am here is because my hand is on the gate. And what I'm saying is, I can't force you to come in, but I'm here to open the door so that so you don't feel like I felt. That's why I'm here, you know, and so that's my work, whether someone else accepts it or not. But I also think that people need to understand that piece, that we are like burned from both sides.
Absolutely.
And so when you're out there fighting and still teaching and posting and talking, and you're still getting your butt kicked in your inbox about why are you acting white and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, and us sellouts for just going to work.
Oh my gosh, you know. And so I want to say, please amplify, uphold, pray for, send good thoughts to the people you see out here in the front of this, because I'm going to say we aren't just taking the hits that you see on social media. And most of them are done behind closed doors anyway. Inboxing. They're not tagging you, they're inboxing you.
Right. Yeah. I have a kind of a good story to finish off today. I have a gentleman that I train in the mornings, an optometrist. This guy is around my same age as me. We finished our session today, and he said, you know, if you weren't teaching me these exercises, I wouldn't believe that I could do this.
Yeah.
If it was some dancer girl doing it, if it was a guy who was a dancer doing it, I wouldn't even believe I could do any of these things. But because I see you doing it, I want to try, and I'm noticing some difference. I'm noticing some change. So, like, thank you for being here doing this.
Yeah, we all have those spaces because we all come from different backgrounds, and we're all going to affect people differently. And that's, again, while it's not one person's work, it's just not. And I just so appreciate that. I just, again, appreciate you all being such a big part of this movement and keeping the discussion going, because it didn't, you know, expire, you know, after the 90-day plan from June 2020. You know, all it did was, when they say about, I don't remember what comedian said that, say it's like when you cut the light on and all the roaches scurry, right? So now, like, the light is on. We've set the light, and we see the mess, and so we're working our way through it. And it's just good to partner with y'all on that. I just appreciate what you're doing.
Yes. No, you're doing great work out there, Tasha. Absolutely, I just say too, you know, we all show up in this work differently based on our own individual experiences. And that's still valid. You know, if you're not out here doing it the way Tasha's doing it, Tasha's a big, bold voice, and she's powerful, and she is so secure in who she is in these movements and spaces that she can just step out there. But the fact that you may not be at that place yet doesn't mean that you don't have valuable things to say.
Exactly.
It doesn't.
Well said.
Can't move the needle.
Exactly.
So, you know, I invite everybody out there. You know, I know some of you going through the feed here. Some of you are already out here learning and doing, and, you know, small voice, big voice, whatever it is. But if you're trying to find a way to make this change, but you're not sure where to start, ask people. Seek mentors for knowledge, just as you do in Pilates. But I can tell you, in this space, nobody's looking to be a king.
Right.
I cannot believe how fast that hour went. I know. I seriously thought it was 25 after.
I know, right? I'm like 11:01. I have someone's gonna be coming any second.
Yeah.
Thank you to both of you. Misty, I'm loving my Wednesdays with you as a co-host.
Me too. It's so fun.
It's super fun. And it's just the fun piece too, like it's almost like we can keep saying goodbye for the next half an hour. So this is
like my
grandma. Yes, this is my second goodbye, but I want to add in the second goodbye, just the fact that as much as we're in here doing the work and we're up every day and we're grinding and we're answering questions, have fun doing it. I'm enjoying this. It's work. We're on purpose, but I'm enjoying it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
Learning
So
to get
much.
to know each other and how to uplift each other without feeling like it's taken away from us,
Right.
and showing that it can be done. So absolutely,
Right.
I'm with you. Yeah,
Nourishment.
You
for
two
sure.
make me better, honestly.
For
Back
sure.
at you.
Same.
Thanks to everybody listening too, because I love these chats. I just love it.
For sure.
All right.
For sure.
Thank you,
All right.
Martin.
Signing off. Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
y'all.
Bye, Tasha. Take care.